Welcome to Bible Prayers and Untold Stories, where every whisper verse is truth, and every story brings light to the soul. Let us journey through the sacred words and uncover the wisdom hidden in prayer. There are moments not planned by man, not written in the ritual, not mentioned in the liturgy, but when they happen, they make heaven and earth listen. May 18th, 2025, in St. Peter's Square, a hand was extended, a man knelt, and a ring, not merely a symbol, became a covenant between heaven and man. In the silence of the ceremony, a sign appeared, not with the sound of a trumpet, but with a silence that resonated in the soul. Who was that man? Why did he kneel? And what really happened between the two shepherds, one who placed a ring and one who received it? Come on this journey, a journey that is not just about a ritual, but about a soul, a mysterious sign, and a new beginning for the church in the midst of dark times. The ring and the kneeler, the silent covenant, a true story, a sacred event, and a message for all who are listening to the call from heaven. That Sunday morning, St. Peter's Square was not just crowded. It was alive. It breathed with a heartbeat of more than 200,000 souls. From all over the 5 continents, from laypeople, cardinals, politicians to unknowns, all came together at the center of the faith to witness what they thought they already knew. The coronation of a new pope, Leo XIV, a man who had lived quietly, walking softly among the ancient stone corridors, now stepping onto the throne of Peter, amidst thousands of lenses and millions of eyes looking on. The choir resounded. The Mass took place as usual, full of standards, full of tradition. The gold-embroidered vestments. The church bells rang. Then the fisherman's ring was brought out. That ring, with the image of St. Peter casting his net, not a symbol of royalty, but of a fisherman, a fisher of men. It does not belong to metal, but to mission, the mission of reconnecting broken souls with the heart of God. And then that moment came. From the middle of the dark red seats of the cardinals, a figure stepped out, gently, without noise. Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle, the son of Asia, he who once stood in the storms of the times to speak of mercy. He walked before the Pope, without saying a word. Then kneel. No one moves. No one speaks. Even the cameras hesitate to press the button, as if they are witnessing something not meant for this world. In that moment that seemed to last only a few seconds, history forked. Not because Tagle broke the protocol, not because he wanted to show off anything, but because the truth within that act broke down all distances between man and God. The ring, given by the hand of a humble man, found a place to rest, not only on the Pope's finger, but on the new identity of the Church. The sky did not change color at that moment, but in the hearts of those with eyes of faith, a gentle light poured down like an invisible miracle. The Vatican was stunned, not because of Tagle, but because something more sacred than man had just happened. A sign, a vision, a silent covenant between two shepherds. One gives, one receives, and God stands between them. Tagle kneels. The light falls down, his head tilted slightly, his hand on the ring. Pope Leo closes his eyes, his hand gently extended. Not all covenants need to be signed on paper. Some require only a kneeling and a hand open to God. It is said, the sacredness of an object lies not in the material it is made of, but in the soul it touches. The fisherman's ring, Annulus Piscatoris, not a precious metal. It is an unwritten commitment between the successor of Peter and God, depicting the image of Peter casting his net. The ring does not represent the power of an empire, but a reminder, you are a fisher of souls, not a king. Each time the ring is given, it is each time the church renews the first call from the shores of Galilee. Follow me, I will make you fishers of men. And that day, the one who knelt to give the ring was not the old cardinal, as usual, but Luis Antonio Tagle, who carries on his journey the journey of forgotten, the poor, the weak, and the unreached souls. Why him? Why an Asian? Why Tagle and no one else? Perhaps none of them can answer, because the answer does not lie in the Vatican. It lies in the heart of God. That ring, when it touches the hand of Pope Leo XIV, is not simply the completion of a ritual. It is the activation of a sacred covenant, a new beginning for a reign built not by power, but by tears and service. The Vatican was stunned, not because of the strangeness of the ceremony, but because they had just seen something that many in the church have forgotten. Spiritual power does not come from power, but from humility. The image of Tagle kneeling, two hands holding the ring as if holding a soul, became the most sacred symbol of the new era. Not to speak, but to repeat in silence that we did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give our souls to the sheep. Pope Leo XIV, with the hand that was given the ring in silence, did not receive just a symbol. He received an invisible cross, which from now on he would bear, not before the world, but before the eyes of God. The ring is made of gold, but the power is forged in tears, blood, and unheard prayers. There are prayers that are not spoken aloud. No sound, no sobbing, no pleas rang out in the Vatican auditorium that day. And that is why it became the deepest prayer. When Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle knelt, no one heard him say anything. No praise, no solemn announcement, only action and silence. But in that silence, a soul spoke, a soul that knew that it did not represent power, but submission to the will of God, a soul that had roamed the poor streets of Manila, that had held the hand of the dying and no one cared. Now it offered its heart to the one who would steer the ship of Peter in the storms of the world. Pope Leo XIV, still motionless, his hands open as if he were receiving not just a ring, but a heavenly responsibility. He closed his eyes, and in those closed eyes, a prayer was heard. No one heard it, but God knew it. Was it a prayer for strength? Or was it simply the silent prayer of a lonely shepherd, standing before the abyss of humanity in chaos, and daring to say, "Here I am, use me"? No camera could record the sound. No journalist could write down the content of the prayer. But every soul present that day felt it. A sacred oath had been made, not with words, but with divine vibrations. From the balcony of the Curia, a cardinal silently wiped away tears. A nun clasped a rosary. A pagan who had never prayed suddenly bowed his head in silence. No one told him to do so, but the Holy Spirit always speaks when people stop speaking. That prayer, never written down, but it lives in the veins of the church, spreading through every chapel, every morning prayer, and every heart that believes in a mystery beyond human reason. In a world full of noise and violence, sometimes the greatest thing God does is teach us to be silent. For it is in that silence that he makes his eternal covenants. It is no coincidence that God often begins in the most unlikely places, not from a throne, but from a manger, not from a palace, but from the dark corners of the world. Luis Antonio Tagle, born in the heart of Manila, where the city lights cannot erase the darkness of poverty and oblivion. His childhood was not associated with red carpets or the sound of organs in cathedrals, but with the cries of street vendors, the sound of honking cars, and the bleeding prayers and hearts of those who had nothing left but faith. Why him? Why did God elevate an ordinary man to a high position in the heart of the Vatican? Perhaps because it was where he came from, where God still listens most clearly. In Tagle's eyes, one does not see ambition. One sees the pain of others. One sees the simple joy of a child being fed, an emotion when a priest bows his head to wash the feet of a homeless person. He is not just a cardinal. He is the voice of those without a microphone. He is the light for souls without a roof, an invisible bridge connecting the universal church to poor sands of Asia, Africa, Latin America. When he knelt that day at the Vatican, it was not just one man who knelt. Asia knelt. Even the small, persecuted churches knelt. And the light from the Philippines, from the people who still pray under leaky thatched roofs, suddenly shone in the most powerful square of the church. The church is no longer Europe. The church is now global, burning from places once considered peripheral. And in that light, Tagle became a symbol, not because he was the best, the most powerful, but because He was the one who knew how to cry with those who were crying, knowing how to live the gospel, not only in the pulpit, but in the poor neighborhood where the smell of rotten fish and the rain was heavy with mud. Pope Leo XIV knew that, and as he reached out to receive the ring, he was also reaching out to the forgotten lands of the church. There are rays of light that do not come from the chandeliers in the cathedral, but from the flickering oil lamp in the cottage, where the faith has burned for generations. And today, one of those rays has shone on the throne of St. Peter. Vatican evening. The last rays of the day slanted through St. Peter's dome, lengthening the shadows of two men, one standing, one kneeling. That moment, fleeting in history, yet remaining in heaven. There was no applause, no speech, no explanation for the action that shook the heart of the church. But those of faith know this is not a ceremony. This is a covenant. A man kneels, holding up the ring. A silent man opened his hands to receive, and between them, God was present. No one saw him with their eyes, but everyone felt him signing his name on the hearts of the two shepherds, with the fire of the Holy Spirit and wordless love. Pope Leo XIV did not become pope only with a ring. He became the bearer of the cross, not a wooden cross, but an invisible cross, the responsibility to lead, to bear the suffering of humanity, and to bend down to each soul as Christ himself did. Cardinal Tagle, when he stood up after that action, was no higher than anyone else, but he became smaller before God than ever. In him there were no more words, but only a silent reply. Lord, I have done my part. There was no thunder in the Vatican sky that day, but there was a commotion in the invisible realm. The angels, if they existed, surely bowed their heads, for this was a sacred covenant, not between man and man, but between God and the church, signed by action, not by paper. In the days that followed, people talked. What role would Tagle play in the new reign? It could be as an advisor, a missionary, or a diplomat. But the truth was, he did not need a title to be important, because that very action had etched his name in the holy history. The church, from that moment on, was no longer the same. A new church was born, not by a decree, but by a bow, not by a cry of long live, but by a wordless act of service. And if we listen carefully, in the wind that afternoon, in St. Peter's Square, we can still hear the final prayer echoing from deep within. Lord, use me as a ring to signify your love for the church. And so the story ends, not with a period, but with a light. A small light, but enough to illuminate an era. Because sometimes what changes a church does not come from a throne, but from one who kneels in silence. The ring and the kneeler, the silent covenant, a living testimony that true leadership is to bow down and serve,